This bill is not about releasing all the Epstein files. Rather, it is giving the government an excuse to continue concealing Epstein files in perpetuity.
The government has to tell us what a bunch of child molesters have to do with national security.
If those files are released, what do you expect to see?
We're going to see perpetrators and procurers. This could all be moot unless people start getting indicted. I know that Mike doesn't believe that there were any children that were molested by Epstein.
When we talk about child molestation, though, I mean, we should be clear that there's never been any credible allegation that there were any prepubescent children molested.
Nobody. It doesn't make any difference if they were prepubescent. A child is a child, and a child cannot make a decision like that.
It's like a 17-and-a-half-year-old, we're going to say is a child, just like a 4-year-old would be a child.
You bet.
Child.
Under 18 is a child. You just said 16 and a half. Like
I said, a 17-and-a-half-year-old was, if we're going to classify them as a child and indistinguishable from a 6-year-old, I think we're just beyond the realm of rational thought.
The law will make a distinction.
Against the law is against the law.
Distinction of 14 and up or below 14. So yeah, there's a little distinction that doesn't make it any less of a crime.
Which intelligence body do you think is most involved in all this? Just to give the audience an idea of the connections that Epstein has had.
Well, I'm well on record as saying that I believe very strongly that Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad access agent.
Ask Steve Bannon if Putin has the photos of Trump blowing Bubba. Epstein also tells Ghislaine Maxwell that Trump is the dog that hasn't barked yet. These are part of the files that were just released. Epstein is also calling Trump a maniac. He says there isn't one decent cell in Trump's body. It shows how much Epstein hated Trump. But more importantly, the House and the Senate finally passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Now we should finally see the Epstein files. But will we? What will be redacted? Well, today I spoke to Nick Bryant, the Epstein investigator who obtained and leaked Epstein's little black book, Lisa Bryant, the director of the Epstein documentary Filthy Rich, John Kiriakou, former CIA officer and a regular on the show, and journalist Michael Tracy, who's been covering the story very extensively. We discussed the files that were just released, but more importantly, what we could see if and when all the files are released. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Good to have you all. Michael, you've been on the show before. We've never talked about the Epstein files. John, we have discussed the Epstein files. Nick and Lisa, I've been following you very closely, so it's a real pleasure. I know, Lisa, you've been on the show, but we haven't spoken, so it's a pleasure to have you. Nick as well. And I will start with you, Nick and Lisa. And I want to start with the latest files that came out just a few days ago. They were released in an interesting way, which I know Michael has been very critical of. You've got the Democrats released, I think, 3 emails, and then the Republicans released thousands more to offer context. But I want to get your initial reaction, Lisa, on those files and what the contents have said, because they've mainly, I wouldn't say implicated Trump, but mentioned Trump and trying to link him to Epstein. Would love to get your initial reaction, Lisa.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think they're very strategic, but telling. And I think they're making Trump squirm and his people, react in the way that we've seen unfold over this past weekend with Trump, shifting to, oh, I'm all for releasing the files. I'm all for transparency. I'm going to sign the bill. Let's everybody move this through. So, I think there's a political motivation, on both sides. And it was pretty evident in the emails that were sent out. There's so many. So, obviously the Trump ones in particular were released first. And,
Yeah, so they say the dog. Yeah, exactly. So there's 2 emails that kind of caught my attention. The first one is calling Trump, and Nick would love to get your thoughts on it. Calling him the dog that hasn't barked yet. Would love to get your thoughts on what Epstein is implying there, considering how extensively you've covered this. And there's also the Bubba email saying, Jeffrey Epstein Mark Epstein, Jeffrey messaging his brother saying, ask him if Putin has the photos of Trump blowing Bubba. And him references Steve Bannon. What do you think those emails mean, Nick, especially the Bubba one?
I do not know what the second email is. I think it's kind of a humorous quip. I mean, that's what I believe. I don't think that Putin, and I don't think that Clinton and Trump really would get along very well as a couple, or even as a liaison. So it's my personal opinion that Mark is kind of quipping. The first one is very interesting. There were 3 emails that were originally released, and I got those emails really early on. I had a connection on the oversight committee, and the first email that came out about the dog that hasn't barked, this is my interpretation, I believe, and Epstein is emailing with Maxwell. I believe they're thinking about law enforcement. And Epstein or Maxwell is suspecting that Trump might have barked or might have clued up law enforcement about them. But Epstein thinks, I don't think so. And then there was a victim that was redacted, and Epstein says the victim has been here with Trump for hours or something to that effect. So that's very incriminating towards Trump. It was released in 2011. That email occurred in 2011. So if that email is true, Trump and a victim were having Trump was with a victim at Epstein's home in 2011. And
sorry, 2 seconds, Nick. That's important. Well, the email was sent on 2011, but reference. So the email says, "I want you to realize that dog hasn't barked is Trump." Victim, which people assume is Virginia Giuffre. Victim spent hours at my house with him, with Trump. He has never once been mentioned, but I'm not sure if that means he spent. So he's referencing the past tense. They've spent time together. That might have been many years ago, because we understand that Trump kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago in 2008. Since then, based on all the other emails, Epstein was not a fan of Trump.
Epstein was definitely not a fan of Trump, and the emails definitely show that. But that email is open to interpretation, and I don't know exactly how we'd interpret that. Now, all of a sudden, Virginia's name was inserted into that document. Instead of victim, the victim was redacted in Virginia's name. And House Republicans did that. And this is where the quandary comes in, because Virginia said that she'd never been molested by Trump. And I think the House Republicans knew that. And a number of us have tried to talk to the Oversight Committee and say, is that redaction by the Republicans? Is that a true redaction? And the Oversight Committee has not gotten back to us. So if that is in fact Virginia, that kind of exonerates Trump, but we don't know about that email. And that was the first email that was released. And we need either the Republicans or the Democrats to tell us whether or not the redacted victim was Virginia Giuffre or not.
Lisa, you were saying something?
I didn't want to interrupt, but I do want to point out that it's this, 2011, email. The timeline for Virginia, she was gone by 2002. So I think the assumption that it's Virginia is, is very political, and it's advantageous if it was, for Trump, if it was Virginia, but the timeline for her, she was long gone by, she left in 2002 and went to Thailand and moved to Australia. So again, all those things are up for interpretation. And Mark Epstein actually has since come forward to explain himself and say, whether we take it with a grain of salt or not, like anybody in this story who might have any knowledge of anything seems to do, is, he said, Bubba, I wasn't referring to Clinton, and I'm not going to say anything else about that. But then I heard that somewhere else he had said he was referring to a horse, which that is even more bizarre. But Mark Epstein claims it was not Clinton, which most people seem to think it was. So anyway, that was just kind of little tidbits.
Michael, what do you make of those emails? Because the Bubba one is very bizarre. It just seems like two brothers joking around. The one where Epstein emails Ghislaine Maxwell talking about Trump and referencing Trump spending hours with the victim in a house with him, it's very vague. Again, as Nick said, it's open for interpretation. What do you make of it all?
Well, the way that these emails have been presented is so cynical. You're right. The Democrats on the House Oversight Committee initially released and sought to amplify a couple of snippets of emails that reference Donald Trump, because that's all they're fundamentally focused on in terms of their political interests, making sensational implications about Donald Trump, even if it doesn't bear on anything factual in terms of his culpability in any child sex crimes, because people assume the truth of the child sex trafficking operation. And then if Trump is in any way tangentially alluded to, they then assume that must be somehow evidence of his guilt, which it plainly isn't. But what the Democrats did was extra cynical, because they added a total superfluous redaction onto the name of Virginia Roberts Giuffre and just put generic victim to obfuscate the nature of the claim that was being made, or to sort of hinder the ability of anybody to investigate its veracity. And then the Republicans just put out an unredacted version of that email, and it was in fact Virginia. Now, why might Democrats want to redact that name? Number one, it is true that Virginia Roberts Giuffre was herself a Trump supporter. She endorsed Trump in 2024, bizarrely enough. She even got involved in nonsensical QAnon theories that were obviously geared towards supporting Trump as this like mythical hero figure. And she also says, she said multiple times, including in her new so-called memoir that was released in October, that she never experienced any kind of sexual wrongdoing from Trump. Also, she has massive credibility problems, to the point that I think it's fair to say she was a serial fabulist. She retracted some of her marquee claims, including against Alan Dershowitz and so forth. So if she's just presented as by Democrats as a generic victim, rather than with the context of all her severe credibility issues, to the degree that nothing said or about her or claimed by her should be taken at face value by anybody who's rational, then what does that let the uninformed viewer of that email do? Just kind of vaguely insinuate that Trump must be guilty of something per this decontextualized email, which, let's remember, so many of these emails are written or drafted in like a joking, sardonic fashion. I also spoke to Mark Epstein, who, before he even put out that statement, told me that that was a different Bubba. Now, he could be lying, I'm not sure, but that's what Mark Epstein claims. But what Democrats and others who are more into the histrionic kind of depiction of this whole Epstein saga want to do is sort of leave aside or omit the context of the manner in which these communications were conducted, which was an undercurrent of joking, sarcasm. Epstein was chronically sort of tongue-in-cheek in how he communicated about things, but then sort of invite the general public, who doesn't have the requisite background information, to make the most salacious possible inferences. That's emblematic of how so much of this Epstein story gets sort of framed for popular consumption.
And you've got the rest of the emails that do clearly show that Epstein does not like Trump whatsoever. He called him maniac, said there isn't one decent cell in Trump's body. So it affirms the Trump story that he banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago in 2008.
Well, it doesn't affirm that story. I mean, that story is still kind of a myth. I mean, there's never been any proof that Trump banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago because Epstein was observed engaging in some kind of questionable behavior with an underage girl or anything to that effect. That's sort of a mythology that a lot of Trump supporters tried to generate to kind of exculpate Trump, or to cast him as somehow the savior in this whole story. I think more likely it had to do with a real estate dispute that Epstein and Trump had around 2004 over a property in Mar-a-Lago that they were both bidding for. But either way, I mean, Epstein clearly was at one point a big fan of Trump, but then he didn't like him politically. Although the irony is that he engaged in constant, very intimate communications with Steve Bannon, who was seen as Trump's consigliere in the 2016 election. And Bannon was advising Epstein on how he could somehow rehabilitate his image circa 2018, 2019. So Epstein would often tell one thing to one person and then another thing to another. So I wouldn't be surprised if he expressed to Bannon some level of sympathy or even admiration for Trump. Epstein was just kind of a wheeler and dealer, right? So he could say whatever his particular audience wanted to hear.
Actually, there's
John,
some emails that address that, because Epstein and Maxwell are talking, or Epstein has exchanged emails with a couple of different people. And he actually says, I was never a member of Mar-a-Lago, because Trump has come out and said that Epstein was banned from Mar-a-Lago. But then he also says that Epstein said Trump knew about the girls. That's a quote. And the rest of the quote is, of course, he knew about the girls, as he asked Ghislaine to stop. So Trump obviously knew that Ghislaine Maxwell was getting girls from Mar-a-Lago and told her to stop. So some of that mythology is actually true.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a 2019 email you're referencing where Trump was quoted. Epstein told Michael Wolff, Trump knew about the girls as he asked Ghislaine to stop. And he was referencing Trump banning him from Mar-a-Lago. And he doesn't have to be a member of Mar-a-Lago to be banned. You don't have to be a member to be able to enter Mar-a-Lago. I'm assuming so, unless you can only enter as a member. But now everyone, we're all celebrating. We're all pretty happy that the bill has passed, the Epstein Files Transparency Act. But John, you have concerns, and we've discussed Epstein previously, and it's hard to deny that there's a lot of links to intelligence, whether it's Mossad, CIA, Saudi intelligence. For someone like that, historically, how easy is it for such files to be released? What do you expect to see now that the Transparency Act has passed? Or do you think that the momentum this time around is too strong for the intelligence to be able to stop this?
Oh, I don't think we should ever underestimate the federal bureaucracy's willingness to evade the law. And what I mean is, these are executive branch documents, right? We didn't need any congressional vote. We didn't need the House to have a vote to discharge from committee. We didn't need the voice vote in the Senate. We shouldn't be waiting for Donald Trump to sign it. These documents should be treated like the JFK documents or the RFK documents. They belong to the executive branch, and all the president had to do was say, release them. That's it. But we've gone through this whole thing now to make it look like some law was being followed, and we had to go through these various steps in the House and the Senate, and then having the bill go to the White House for the president's signature. But Congress has repeatedly voted to force the release of all of the JFK docs, and they haven't been released. Donald Trump said that he hasn't released all of them. He says that they're a threat to national security if they were to be released. So what do we do in this case? We just take his word for it that all of the documents are released, because that's really where we end up hanging. We just have to hope that he does what Congress has mandated, and we hope that he orders the release of all the documents.
So how does that release? How does that work? So when you release files, who releases those files? How do you know? How do you confirm that all the files were released? I'm not talking about things being redacted. I'm talking about files being disposed of completely wiped without anyone knowing from the hard drives.
In a perfect world, the department or agency that has jurisdiction over the documents will release all of them, because the law says that they have to release all of them. That's in a perfect world. But we know that that world doesn't exist. And so the documents are owned, so to speak, by the Department of Justice. And so Pam Bondi now, by law, has to, once the bill is signed by Donald Trump, has to tell her people in whatever organization, the Freedom of Information Act office, the FBI, wherever these documents happen to be housed, release the documents. Now, they'll take a month or two and redact things that need to be redacted. But again, when it comes to whether or not they actually release all the documents, we just have to take their word for it.
But hold on, I don't know. I don't understand why people are so thrilled about the passage of this law.
I don't either.
If they're clamoring for full disclosure of Epstein files, because if you read the actual text, which maybe I'm the only one who bothered to do, it does not provide for the full disclosure of all Epstein files. Rather, it explicitly excludes a huge range of potential files from disclosure. So, for example, any file which may somehow bear on national defense or U.S. foreign policy is exempted from disclosure. Any file which might be claimed to be intertwined with the identifying information of purported victims is exempt from disclosure. Remember, all these purported victims are now at minimum in their 30s. So why is it that any identifying information that relates to them needs to be concealed from the public in perpetuity? And actually, Bradley Edwards, the lawyer who was at the press conference in front of the Capitol in September, the so-called victims lawyer, He is the one who conferred with Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie in crafting the language of this legislation. And he, despite the public posturing, is expressly opposed to the full disclosure of all Epstein files. You know how I know that? Because Bradley Edwards wrote a letter to the federal judge in the Southern District of New York, Berman, expressly opposing the disclosure of Epstein files in the possession of the judiciary on the ground that it might somehow harm victims, which is another way of saying that Edwards wants to maintain his ability to file extremely profitable lawsuits, and that might be compromised if sort of countervailing information as to the credibility of the so-called victims comes out. So this bill is not about releasing all the Epstein files. Rather, it is giving the government an excuse to continue concealing Epstein files in perpetuity. People should know that.
I want to say, we talked about national security, and that was kicked around, that files pertain to national security will not be released. And I think at this point, and Pam Bondi said it when she earlier released the documents, that documents that pertain to national security will not be released. But now I believe the government has to tell us, and Michael doesn't think that any kids were molested, but the government has to tell us what a bunch of child molesters have to do with national security. I mean,
and I want to add something about the tone here that Michael seems to have a negative towards the women and the survivors and their truth. There's 1,000 women. We're hearing that from the FBI. I think we would have all thought maybe it was a little less than that. We knew there were hundreds and hundreds, but let's say there's been maybe 50 or 60 that have gone public with their name, and that might even be high. So all those other women, for whatever reason, do not want their name published, and or some of those details. I think the details may come forward if they're released, but the redaction of their names is important, especially if they haven't come forward. And, these women, they're not famous, they're not well connected, but they matter, and their pain matters. Their names matter, whether they want it or they don't want it. And, they shouldn't be left to just do all the suffering for everybody else's agenda.
But don't claim that you're in favor of full disclosure of the Epstein files if you're demanding redactions, or if you're demanding that certain files be withheld because they might cause "quote unquote" pain to certain unnamed women.
I'm only talking about the women,
But
and I think that.
Yeah,
I think that's. I'm.
It seems pretty reasonable to me.
Surprised
like Michael,
to hear what you're saying, because I'm not talking about the other exemptions that you're talking about. The national security. That's all a bunch of crap, right? That's a protection for whoever it's protecting. But anything could fall into that. But I feel like
disclosure of everything, okay, including materials which we know with pretty much certainty would exist that falsely impugn many men or even some women of committing child sex crimes. Like, my position is that the public interest overrides whatever claims to privacy those falsely accused men might have to keep.
But what do
why are they all falsely accused?
You're saying that any file that relates to a victim must be concealed in perpetuity. Why?
No, I'm saying I'm not saying
the
files. I think it's the names. The names should be redacted. Like, if you add victim, I think most people want to know who the rapists are, not the victims. I think
but it's not just the names, Mario. It's any identifying information. So there's going to be a huge constellation of material that in some way impinges on identifying information related to a victim. And per the text in this legislation, and per what the victim's lawyers is demanding of the judiciary, not just the names, but a much more information beyond simple names can be redacted, and almost certainly will.
So one other thing I want to offer a clarification, that the clause you're talking about is relatively common, and applies to almost all declassification bills. And this one is actually narrower than other bills. But your worry, Michael, and I think John, you've kind of hinted at similar worry, that there's many loopholes to be able to exempt a lot of the files from being released. Nick and Lisa, if those files are released, what do you expect to see?
I expect that we're going to see, well, hopefully, we're going to see perpetrators and procurers. That would be my hope. I don't know if that's going to happen. This could all be moot unless people start getting indicted. And I know that Mike doesn't believe that there were any children that were molested by Epstein.
Okay, can I respond that the second time you made that claim?
But there's, let me finish this. There's a number of sources that say that. And actually, the Virgin Islands sued the Jeffrey Epstein estate and said that Jeffrey Epstein was trafficking minors to the Virgin Islands from 2002 or 2005 to 2019. And I think that that is pretty substantial because Epstein's estate gave the Virgin Islands a significant amount of money and then half the proceeds that were sold from selling that island.
Michael, I'll let you respond to that.
I have to address
Go
that
ahead.
because, Nick Bryant just makes stuff up constantly. So I'm not surprised that he would do so again and try to attribute a view to me that I've never expressed. Epstein himself has acknowledged in multiple venues that he did have sexual contact to varying degrees with females who were below the legal age of consent in Florida. Okay, whether or not those girls were told by other girls to lie about their ages so they could go to his house in Palm Beach, which we know did happen. Haley Robson, one of the supposed survivors who was there again yesterday, she had a probable cause affidavit issued for her in 2005 on the grounds that when she was an adult, she had recruited or enticed other girls in the same age range but younger, below the age of consent, which is 18 in Florida, to lie about their ages to Epstein so they could go give a sexualized massage and collect $200, $300 of cash. So I'm not denying that that ever occurred. Epstein himself never denied that ever occurred, in the sense that he pleaded guilty to a state level charge in Florida that was procuring minor under 18 for prostitution. So I mean, Nick Bryant could just make up stuff as he has so chronically done, but I'm happy to clarify if he wants to keep doing that.
You're on record that Epstein didn't molest any minors after 2005. Are you still going to believe that? Are you still going to maintain that? Even though we've got all this documentation from the Virgin Islands that shows that Epstein was trafficking minors.
I'm on record as having heard you state as fact, as though you had factually verified this information, that after Epstein was released from custody of the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office in 2009, that he continued to, quote, molest girls or molest children. And there's never been any evidence of that. And in fact, you issued up a vague but seeming correction to clarify that you had no basis to make that statement.
And that girl was,
I believe
that's your
that
position
there
that
are
you falsely
women
stated that I simply corrected.
There are attorneys that have heard from victims who are underage during that time period.
Which ones?
And well, I'm not going to mention. I don't know their names. There's some Eastern European women for sure. There are, I believe, also some New York women.
She wasn't. Michael, just quickly, what's your position? What is your position?
I don't
on this?
understand why you don't believe the women. Can you explain that?
Which women? Like, let's be specific.
So, Michael,
I don't think you believe anyone.
How many people do you think got molested in this whole saga? What's your position, Michael? I'm asking you now.
I think got molested.
Yeah.
I don't know that I could give you an exact number. However, it is clear that among the girls that were recruiting one another, like Haley Robson or Virginia Roberts Gouffre,
Haley Robson, I want to point out, was a minor when she was groomed by Epstein at 16, and she was 18 when she brought the girl. She had the misfortune of bringing the girl who started the whole thing.
Right. So she should not have been criminally. She quote unquote trafficked that girl and told her to lie about her age.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean she wasn't groomed and she wasn't a victim herself.
Well,
all these
women were groomed.
Yeah, well, obviously you don't understand it.
So groomed into proclaiming how thrilled she was to be the Heidi Fleiss. She said that was an exact quote of Palm Beach.
You know what? She's a teenager.
She's a child, for God's sake.
An 18-year-old is not a child.
You know, I think I'm
an 18-year-old is a child, Mario?
Well, maybe you should learn about when brains are formed.
I'm confident that I'm the only person here that was ever actually in prison with child molesters. And I can tell you to a man that they don't change. They can't just turn it off like it's a switch. They're warped. They're diseased. And even if they get caught, all they can talk about is their crimes and reliving their crimes and reliving the situations that they were in with children. They can't stop. You don't just turn it on and turn it off, and then you get caught and you get a sweetheart deal slap on the hand and everything goes away and then you're normal all of a sudden. That's just not real life.
Michael, when we talk about child molestation, though, I mean, we should be clear that there's never been any credible allegation that there were any prepubescent children molested, which had typically
it
been the
doesn't make any
definition of
difference
child
if they were
molestation prior to this
prepubescent.
whole
A
saga.
child is a child, and a child cannot make a decision like that carries its weight in law. A child.
So we're talking about we're talking like a 17-and-a-half-year-old. We're going to say is a child, just like a 4-year-old would be a child.
You bet. Especially when we know scientifically that their brains are not fully developed until they're 25. So
Okay, so is a 24-year-old a child?
I just said an 18-year-old
How many
is a child.
24-year-olds?
How
many
18-year-olds is a
under
child.
18? Under 18 is a child. You just said 16 and a half. Like
No, I said a 17-and-a-half-year-old was, if we're going to classify them as a child and indistinguishable from a 6-year-old, I think we're just beyond the realm of rational
the
thought
law
here,
will make a
because that makes
distinction
zero
Against
sense.
the law is
will
against the
make a
law.
distinction of 14 and up or below 14. So yeah, there's a little distinction that doesn't make it any less of a crime.
The first girl that came forward was 14, Mike.
Right, who had been
So
recruited by
there's-
Haley
there's-
Robson and told to lie about her
Right,
age,
yes,
and
'cause it's never
participated in a
Epstein's fault.
sexualized
There's Ghislaine
massage. She didn't have
Maxwell.
full
She's
sexual
fourteen.
Just like
anybody
every
else in
other
that first
girl, like
encounter.
Courtney Wild and every other girl
Pervert.
who was in high school recruited all of their friends, just like the 20-year-olds and the 21-year-olds who were groomed and learned this mentality that it was acceptable and okay.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
yes,
so this is
that they
another
received
bizarre irony of all
finan-
this. Lisa's saying that a
Can I
21-year-old
finish?
woman was groomed. Okay, whether or not you think the brain is fully developed until 25 or 26, I think that's perfectly plausible of a hypothesis. But to say that a 21-year-old could have been groomed as a full-fledged
well,
adult
that's
who's
why
entitled
we
to
are
every
where we
legal
are in this story. Because
authority
men
in the
like
law
you
as an
have
adult.
not advanced with the times here to know that trafficking and grooming and what it is and trauma, when behavior is normalized.
Or I just
and
don't buy, or I don't buy into all the dogma that's being funneled out into the public to sort of justify these claims to victimhood. Lisa Phillips, she was 21 or 22, right, when she claims that she was
Correct.
victimized / groomed. So she was a full-fledged adult, and yet in the public arena, she allows herself to be conflated with child sex trafficking victims because she consensually went to a Caribbean island and had some
You're
kind
saying
of
she allowed
encounter with
herself to be
seriously?
conflated with them. I don't understand that. She came forward to talk about her experience. She doesn't claim that she was a 15-year-old. She owns the fact that she was that age, but she also explains
Well, she's
how
just a
she
generic
was
survivor.
Mikey doesn't think
generic.
people can
Yeah,
be
she's a
groomed
survivor.
when
You're
they're
right.
older.
She is a survivor, but
No,
you know,
because you know what grooming was coined to refer to when adults illicitly prey or try to habituate actual children into
Michael,
becoming
just a
susceptible
quick-
to
I'm not
just
sure
wanna ask
why
you-
we're
just wanna
going
ask you-
down this
Michael,
road.
just wanna-
I think
just
it's
wanna
right.
ask
We
you-
should
now
move forward.
classify that as something that adults
Michael,
in their 20s or who
just
knows,
wanna-
even older could be subject to.
Why
Michael,
are you defending
Michael,
Epstein? Really, is what
Michael,
you're doing.
just
You're
wanna-
defending
just wanna-
I'm
Epstein and his
defending sort of
behavior.
reality and truth,
Why do you-
and I'm
Michael,
against moral
just
hysteria.
on that point,
and
Michael,
panic
Michael,
that
on
has
that, a quick
characterized
question.
this whole issue.
So, Michael, considering your stance, why do you think those files are being it taking so long to be released? Why is Trump resisting releasing them for so long? Why are we seeing so much fighting within MAGA? The impact it had on Trump's support base, and still not being released.
Well, as I explained before, a key reason why many of the files have not yet been released is because the so-called victims have been demanding that they not be released. And so have their lawyers, such as Bradley Edwards, who I can give you the letter that he sent to Judge Berman in August demanding that Epstein files not be released that are in the
But you see, so
possession
you're
of the
saying this
judiciary.
is the reason Trump, because Trump doesn't have made that
No, I'll
claim.
get
No
to
one's
Trump.
made that claim.
I'll get to Trump. I mean, clearly, Trump did have a well-established past relationship with Epstein. You can find a million photos and videos of them consorting with one another at parties and whatnot. They clearly traveled in the same sort of like modeling circles. Jeffrey Epstein was involved with Victoria's Secret by way of Leslie Wexner, one of his big financial patrons who owned Victoria's Secret. Trump was a beauty pageant proprietor. And so there's a lot of material that could be latched onto by Trump's political foes and already has to sort of insinuate that he's culpable in some kind of child sex trafficking operation, because that's the underlying dogma here, right? Or the mythology that there was the child sex trafficking operation that was orchestrated by Epstein and enforced by blackmail or something. And so for as long as this stays in the news or stays as a major topic of public fascination, Trump's going to find that to be detrimental to his interests politically because it creates fissures in MAGA, etc. So he calls it a hoax, and he says that it's being sort of engineered by the Democrats, which it is to some extent, as evidenced by how the Democrats cynically released those emails last week. So with Trump, the dumbest or
Mikey, you
simplest
gotta
explanation
let
is
you
usually the
gotta
most
just-
accurate.
you gotta let
He
other
finds
people
this to
talk.
be a
Yeah,
politically
Michael, I will go.
disadvantageous issue
Michael,
for
I got.
him.
I got your
Let
position.
us comment on that, right.
I understand. So I want to go back to that same question, John, because I just don't think that the reason those files are being released because the victims don't want to release them. I understand that's your position, Michael.
That's
so
one
I haven't
reason.
heard that.
One reason.
I haven't heard that explanation before. I do believe that the intelligence is involved. I've gone through Epstein's history, done a few interviews on Epstein, and his connection is just mind-boggling. So my question to you is, what would be happening behind the scenes right now? So when Trump is being requested to release the files by everyone in his support base, what then? Do you think it's one of his donors giving him a call? If they give him a call, what would they say to him? Would it be the intelligence?
You're asking me?
I am.
Yeah, at the CIA, when we were ordered by Congress to release files, we would put a team together in a room with boxes literally stacked to the ceiling, and people went through looking specifically for sources and methods or information that might expose the name of someone who was in the pay of the CIA or friendly to the CIA. At the State Department, I had occasion to do this also at the State Department. It was all about looking strictly for classified information they call currently and properly classified. This is different. This is names and who's been formally accused of a crime and who hasn't. I would say probably that among the victims, if they don't want to be public, their attorneys probably could make a strong argument as to why their name should be redacted. But anything else would be for let's say some wealthy Trump donor to call the president or call the attorney general and say, take me out, or take me out and I'll give you, $1 million or whatever the conversation might be, would be illegal and highly unethical.
But do you think
And
it does
I'd
happen?
like to interject about a point that
People would try.
Michael made earlier. I gave an interview to Chris Hedges, and it's been a very popular interview. It's up to 2.7 million. And Mikey wrote a scathing email.
Told me Mikey.
Hold on, Michael, please let
Mikey,
Michael
Nick,
Nick. Michael, if you don't mind, please. Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
I'd
I mean,
let you
it's feel
talk.
like make
You
fun
gotta
of my
let me-
name
you
and
gotta let
address
me
me.
talk.
Go ahead, Nick, go ahead.
So Mikey wrote a scathing email to Chris Hedges and his producer saying that I'd committed all these outright falsehoods and egregious.
Which you did.
So I addressed all of Mikey's condemnations and excoriations of me. And it's on my website. It's called Mikey and Me, A Love Story. And anybody can read it. And Mikey really heavily attacked me. And he said that there was no such thing as adult grooming. And there's definitely adult grooming. There's the Journal of Forensic Psychology and Research says there's adult grooming. The Journal of Social Work in the Global Community says there's adult grooming. There's a number of academic journals that say that there's adult grooming. Mikey, do you have an inside track on this? Do you have a PhD? I mean, how can you tell us that there isn't such a thing as adult
Well,
grooming?
Nick, I mean, I'm sure you recall, what I was mainly focused on were the myriad factual assertions, one after the other, that you stated on that podcast and have stated elsewhere that were just provably, demonstrably false. And I read your stupid rebuttal to me that seems to be very fascinated on using the name Mikey for me, as though I don't know what your plan is there exactly. But I think you even partially conceded that you had misstated a bunch of facts. For example, you claimed that the Epstein Victims Compensation Program was sort of surreptitiously engineered by David Boies so that the victims or purported victims would have to agree to sign a non-disclosure agreement in order to receive compensation, and couldn't name their perpetrators if they got the money, which was just 100% totally false. If you had ever bothered to read the court-approved protocol for that program, which I'm sure you didn't. And just like you went around claiming that like a Department of Health and Human Services study found that up to 320,000 women and children are trafficked every year in the United States, whereas no study has ever made any such assertion. I could go through many more if you'd like.
I would say read Mikey and Me, A Love Story. And
yeah, go ahead and read it.
And Mikey will be rebutted. I rebut everything that he says.
No,
I did make some mistakes. I'll agree with that when I was responding to Chris Hedges. But Mikey made a lot more mistakes when he was attacking.
Okay.
Mikey likes to attack people.
I want to go to Lisa. I have a question for you. If we do get the files and they're unredacted, I know you've spoken a lot to the victims. Not sure what you could share, but they're trying to implicate Trump. Obviously, Clinton is mentioned a lot among many other names. We saw a lot of back and forth between Larry Summers, who just stepped down from OpenAI's board, I think just a few hours ago, and he's still teaching at Harvard, but is pulling out of any public appearances. Do you think we will see a lot of public figures implicated in this, and any names you could mention?
Well, it's a tricky thing. I would love to see the files release names that aren't going to be protected due to governments, I guess, redacting. So I go back to the redactions that Michael has talked about. It's hard for me. I know who everyone that Virginia claims. I know a number of other survivors who have told me some other names. So I could put together my own list and probably come up with 25 names. I don't think it's in my best interest right now to mention them. It's not my job. I think we all in this room know probably at least a half a dozen that we're fairly certain, were either abusers or, certainly very well aware of what was going on, complicit. But I just can't. You can.
What do you think? So the names,
Mario,
the names that you know,
in front of
what you want to name that? And then I don't understand why you're even here, because you're just shitting on everything. It doesn't make any sense.
I mean, I'm not surprised that you can't take any kind of critically minded
Michael, please, Michael, let me ask Lisa just a quick question. If the names, if the names, Lisa, if the names that you know are all mentioned, what do you think would happen politically without mentioning any names? How significant is it?
I think it's very significant. And I think just as we've seen, like with Jess Staley and the ones that have been named publicly or have come out through the lawsuits, the bank lawsuits, it should go further than it has in terms of just disgracing them publicly or they're losing their job. I think that there should be some more investigations, but I don't think our government has the backbone to continue to prosecute people. So I think there are a lot of people that need to be investigated who were abusers, and there's also people who were very complicit and have ties to banks, to other intelligence and things like that, who also need to be investigated. But I don't know if it's just it's just all become so political, always has been so political, that it's very difficult to move any needle forward. And while the UK jumped ahead, which is great, to get after Prince Andrew and Mendelssohn, there are many Prince Andrews and Mendelssohns living in the United States. Maybe not quite as high profile as, Andrew, no longer a prince, but it's difficult because it's all just become political, and always kind of has been. So
the cover-up started with a Republican administration, George Bush II, and Obama kept it covered up. Biden kept it covered up. Trump kept it covered up. So I believe that both parties are guilty as far as this as being malfeasant with Jeffrey Epstein.
Who's covering up, Nick? Who is covering it up in all these administrations? This is the spot that we'll talk about.
The initial cover-up started in 2007, 2008, and it was done by Alexander Acosta, who is the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. And he was the one that gave everybody blanket immunity that was associated with Jeffrey Epstein. And he had the state give Jeffrey Epstein the sweetheart deal where he did 13 months in a county jail, and he was able to go out during the day. But my contention here is Alexander Acosta would not cover up a huge trafficking network like Epstein was running by himself. He would not go out on a limb to cover that up. There's only two people in the government that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. One is the attorney general and one is the president. And I don't believe Alberto Gonzalez, who was the attorney general at that time, is going to cover up a nationwide trafficking network, although Mikey doesn't think it's a nationwide trafficking network, unless he is told by his boss. So I believe that cover up emanated from George Bush II. I do believe that for sure.
John, you were nodding. Hold on, Michael.
Michael, perpetrators.
Michael, we'll go there. John, you were nodding as Nick mentioned President Bush. You agree with the analysis?
I do. This is not a Democratic versus Republican issue. This is an issue that should tell every American what's wrong with Washington. You know, when you've got a delegate, we learned this today thanks to the Washington Post. You have a delegate from a Democrat from the Virgin Islands who turns out was texting Jeffrey Epstein as the Epstein hearing was going on in 2019, apparently then allowing Epstein to offer up questions for her to ask of Michael Cohen, the president's former attorney. You know something is rotten in Washington. And it's even more rotten than when literally every Democratic member of the House of Representatives votes no to censure her for that. Now, I'm not a Republican. I've never been a Republican. I'm no longer a Democrat either, because they're both rotten and corrupt. I think Nick is exactly correct when he says that Alberto Gonzalez could never have made this decision on his own. He didn't have the wasta in Washington to make a decision like this on his own. This decision had to go up to the president. But then when George W. Bush is no longer president and this liberal savior, Barack Obama, is all of a sudden president, why didn't he make things right? Because he was up to his neck in this Washington corruption as well. So we shouldn't expect relief from either one of the parties. Neither one.
5 administrations. It's been 5 administrations. And now Trump, is so, immersed in the story himself. It's just, I'll believe it when I see it. But, we're all for transparency, I think. And whatever transparency we can get, we'll take. The survivors do want these files released. They do. We want to see. Some's going to be redacted. We'll never know. We just probably never will know. But don't you think some information is better than none? Or, I just feel like the public is not going to stop. Survivors aren't going to stop. And I think they're in a large, part of why we're at where we're at. Yes, the public became obsessed with it in July or back in when Pam Bondi made her statement, and then it reamed up over the summer. But when the women came forward in DC a couple of months ago, and then yet again, and haven't stopped, and they're campaigning and going everywhere and talking and finally kind of being heard, whether you are trusting what they say or not. The bottom line is they're putting the pressure on. And I think that combined is a significant reason why we may actually, hear Trump say he's going to do it. And then we'll see if it happens there, because John, as we know, he's investigating the Democrats now. So anyway.
John, another question. Which intelligence body do you think is most involved in all this? Just to give the audience an idea of the connections that Epstein has had, but which intelligence body do you think has the most impact on and most influence on keeping this under wraps? There's some people always pointing the finger towards Israel Mossad. They do have significant influence. I'm not sure if they have enough influence to tell the president of the United States not to release files that his own MAGA base is requesting. Is it American intelligence? In my limited experience in this or knowledge about this, they'd have, in my opinion, more influence than any foreign intelligence, including Mossad. What's your position on this, having covered both and worked with both?
Well, I'm well on record as saying that I believe very strongly that Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad access agent. If you want to get close to the likes of a former president or the wealthiest businessmen in the world or a member of the British royal family, you're not going to recruit them. So you recruit somebody who can be next to them. And so I think he's a classic, in my view, almost obvious access agent. But with that said, he's an American citizen. And if there's an American citizen with contacts with foreign intelligence services, the FBI's counterintelligence division should have been on him like white on rice. And if they weren't, with an eye toward prosecuting him, it's because they were working with him or they were helping him to cover things up.
And usually assets would work with multiple intelligence agencies, correct? It's pretty common for that to happen.
Almost never. Almost never. Only if they've been directed to. For
Okay, 'cause
example,
there's
it's not unusual for the CIA to recruit an asset and then to say, look, we want you to work with our British friends. We're going to introduce you to somebody from MI6. That happens. But the FBI and Mossad,
Oh wow.
not in my experience.
He was obviously working with Israeli intelligence.
Yes.
Epstein. And he was obviously compromising people, although Mikey doesn't believe that he was compromising people. But would the American intelligence allow the Israeli intelligence to compromise American politicians on American soil without getting a cut of that intelligence? That's what I don't see.
You would be surprised by the almost ridiculous leeway that Mossad is given in the United States. It's scandalous, and it's unlike any other intelligence service in the world. Just doesn't.
Since there's been talk about how there's been a cover-up across multiple presidential administrations, apparently starting with George W. Bush, that has prevented the release of this phantom list of names of perpetrators or sex traffickers that continues to not be disclosed. Let's remember that when the so-called survivors held a press conference and rally on September 3rd in Washington, D.C., just like they did yesterday, Lisa Phillips stood up and said that she and other survivors were going to be compiling their own list of uncharged sex trafficking perpetrators. And then Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene said that because they're such advocates of survivors and supporters of them healing their trauma or whatever, they were going to read out that list of names on the floor of the House of Representatives under the protections of the speech and debate clause, so they could not face any defamation lawsuits. And we're over 2 months since that event, and there has been no progress whatsoever on furnishing those names to those members of Congress who offered to read them out on the floor of the House of Representatives. Now the talking point is,
disagree.
oh, it's not their job to name them. Well, Lisa Phillips is the one who proactively offered to name them and to give the information to the sympathetic members of Congress who could then put out those names into the public. So is the fact that that list still hasn't
I'll
been
let Lisa reply.
could that possibly bear on
Go
the
ahead,
lack
go
of
ahead, Lisa.
veracity underlying those accusations?
I'll let you
No,
reply.
I don't think
Yeah,
so.
Michael, I'll let Lisa reply, and I've got a final quick question, rapid fire question for everyone. Go ahead, Lisa.
Well, I've had many conversations with Lisa Phillips about that very thing. I was right there when she came hot off saying that. She said, oh my gosh, I said it right off the top of my head. You know, Brad shot me this look, Brad Edwards, the attorney. You know, she was caught up in the moment and then was warned, like, you know, that could be problematic for you guys, and it's not your job. Yeah, they could give the list, and Massey did read off a couple of names. Yes, they were names that are already out there. He started to go there, and quite frankly, I would like to see someone like that take the responsibility off of the women, because they're going to be sued immediately by any of them whose name whether it's accurate or not. I know you don't seem to be a believer of most of it. I think if you knew the true stories, you might be a believer of some of these women. I can't guarantee all, but I'm just saying that, for her to say that is their frustration. They want the names out there. Their attorneys, know what they've said in depositions, and some of this hopefully will be released in depositions. Now, whether the government's going to redact the name, maybe, just like the whole comment about Trump and Virginia's name redacted, if it was Virginia, maybe, they're going to leave it up for the public and people to read and put those names out there. It's like, so
she didn't name who the prime minister was who supposedly violently raped her. Why not?
But and all
because
of the,
it might subject the claim to some actual investigation to determine its credibility.
Well, Right, exactly. And in other documents,
right, his
name that you haven't seen, perhaps.
I think many people wouldn't want to name. I think, Michael, no one would want to.
His name has been released,
and not many people would want to name or implicate a former prime minister, especially a prime minister of a country.
Why
like,
not? I mean, if
the
claim is rock solid, right?
It's a scary thing
why
to do.
She did name him
to avoid a defamation.
Lisa saying she did. Lisa saying she did.
She named him in deposition.
So final question. Nick, I'm going to go to you. I'm going to let you kick it off with a rapid fire question. What do you expect to see over the next few months? Final question, Nick.
I think that what we need is indictments. And if we don't give indictments, we're going to fall short of what the American people want. 89% of the American people want transparency with the Epstein case. And I think if we get transparency with the Epstein case, true transparency we're going to get indictments. And I also want to tell your listeners, go to my website, nickbryantnyc.com, and read Mikey and Me, A Love Story, because
You're obsessed.
I really delineate how Mikey likes to make things
Michael,
up.
I noticed you didn't link to my original article that spelled out in great detail all the
Michael,
false claims you made.
let me go to your final question to you. What do you expect to see over the
And I
next few
still
months?
love you, Mikey.
Okay.
Go
Is
ahead,
that to me?
Michael. Yes.
Oh, what do I
Next few months,
expect?
What do you expect to see?
I expect that politicians and journalists and others with a lack of any scrupulousness in how bound they feel they are to factual standards will keep rattling off hugely salacious theories and speculative claims that are not grounded in any real facts or evidence about what they perceive to be the reality of this sprawling child sex trafficking and blackmail
So you don't think
operation,
there'll be
evidence for
much
which is
in those
virtually
files?
nil. So there'll be more interesting information, I'm sure, that comes out that people will latch on to and like imbue larger meaning to. And I'm all in favor of disclosing all the files that are in the possession of the government or even a private entity for that matter. But you know, the dogma around this has basically become unfalsifiable, and so it's entered a realm beyond reason. And so I think people are just going to use it as fodder to kind of keep fueling these extravagant theories, and they don't really care about the facts, and they demand that the so-called survivors not be asked any probing questions, even though many of them are multi-millionaires. They got tax-free settlements from JP Morgan, from Deutsche Bank, from the Epstein estate. They are people who now are claiming that they're entering the political arena. Lisa Phillips declared that she's going to lead a survivor political advocacy movement yesterday, and yet Ro Khanna got up and said, we must not, journalists are not permitted to ask these survivors any journalistic questions. Why not?
So
If they have the confidence of their convictions, they should be happy to
I got what you
answer
expect. Got your thank you, Michael. Lisa, what do you expect to see over the next few months?
I expect to see more of a little drip, drip, drip. And I'm going to be curious, and I don't know because I'm not an attorney, the legalities of Trump, asking for his own, asking Pam Bondi to investigate Clinton and Larry Summers and all that. If that is going to be an excuse, maybe someone here has more intel on that to say, oh, well, it's an ongoing investigation and we actually can't release the files, but yet I am supporting it, but now we can't. So I think that that's very interesting to see if that, will happen and how that would land for the MAGA base and for Trump, because it's just, I'd rather see a slow drip than nothing. But I think, in 30 days, I believe is the window. Once he signs it, they're supposed to deliver everything. And everything is very loosely defined. But I think it'll continue to be a slow drip. I do agree, Michael, that it will be, a lot of people still going down those rabbit holes and things that aren't necessarily verifiable. But I think if you don't put some of these names out there that clearly had a very deep association, they need to be investigated. I'm not going to say what I feel or think, but those people's names need to come out. It's not saying they're necessarily guilty, but it's letting an investigation into those people happen, because I think it's just going to be ignored until something's put out there and they're forced to do so. So I hope some of that will happen as well.
John, final thoughts?
I agree with Lisa. I hope for the best. I hope that everybody is serious about getting this information out to the public when it comes right down to it. My view is the public owns the information, has a right to know what the government is doing in its name. But I don't expect miracles. You can't change the swamp so quickly, as Donald Trump used to call it. I hope for the best. I expect the worst, but I think what we're going to end up with is this little drip that Lisa just talked about.
I appreciate it, gentlemen. John, good to see you again. Michael as well.
Good to see you.
Nick and Lisa, good to see you as well. Thank you so much, everyone.